Okay, so in this module, we're going to go ahead and start setting up our renders for every one of our effects here. So starting with the blood, let's go in and hide our dust fluid here, and we're going to render this with software render because Mental Ray isn't included with 2017, although we will run into some motion blur problems when we're using software with blobby particles. So first thing, I'm going to grab the blood here. Let's add this on to a different layer. Let's call this blood. And let's hold right click and let's assign a new material. And let's grab just a blend. Let's make it a blood color here. So let's select our color and let's give it kind of a dark red. And let's just reduce the reflectivity a little bit and the eccentricity a little bit. And let's go ahead and add in a directional light. Let's go to Create, Lights, Directional Light. And let's just do a top-down light here. And also, let's duplicate this and let's just add one that kind of faces camera, or that's kind of facing our particles from the camera view, so we can illuminate just what the camera is going to be looking at a little bit better. And let's just reduce this down, maybe 0.25. So if we take a render of this, let's go into our Maya software and let's just pull down a preset here. Let's choose quality, production quality, and we'll keep motion blur off. So if we grab a render, this is what we get. The good thing about blobbies is we have a threshold value that's going to kind of eat away around the particles based on the distance. So if we go into our particles here, let's go into shading, and blobby surface, we've got the threshold value. So if we were to say put this up to 1 and render that, you'll see that we're kind of eating away at the shape of our particles here. Let's save that and turn this back down to 0.1. And this is going to give us a much more organic look for our blood. And we could turn this up maybe 1.5. And you can see that we're eating away even more. So I'm going to keep this at 1. And that's pretty much it for the rendering of our blood. So because this will be motion blurred usually quite a lot in every shot, because it's quite fast moving blood, you can get away with a lot with just the threshold value here and getting some unique shapes of splurts of blood that just kind of shoot past the camera real quick. So that's it. So now let's just go in, and my software doesn't do a good job of rendering motion blur with blobby particles. Although you shouldn't have a problem with Mental Ray. Essentially just turn on the motion blur, and if we were to use a basic 2D motion blur here, by default the length is 1 and the smooth value is 2. So if we were just to render this, you can see it's just kind of blurring it a little bit, but it doesn't really look like a great motion blur. So let's increase this to 2 and the smooth value to 5, but it's not going to make a whole lot of difference. Maya and software render doesn't really do a good job motion blurring this. So you have the option of doing a post motion blur like Real Smart Motion Blur in your compositing package, which is what I'm going to end up doing. Or we can just render these with Mental Ray and you won't have a problem. And you'll get great motion blur and it renders really fast. So that's probably what I would do. And also to note that Arnold at the moment doesn't support blobby renders. So although it's really, really efficient in rendering particles, we can't get away with rendering these blobby surfaces in Arnold with motion blur. So we're limited to how we render these, but in every other version of Maya that has Mental Ray, this is a really, really fast technique to render these out. So I'm going to keep this motion blur on, and I'm going to render this with these settings in our frame range here until it gets out of camera to about frame 40. Just with the production settings, and I'm going to rely on a post motion blur to get the rest out of it. So I'm going to set this up. I'm just going to render out of JPEGs and use the format that works for you. And let's go ahead and set this off for render. Okay, so I've done a couple of renders here, and I've rendered this one with Mental Ray in Maya 2016, just so you can see how easy it is to get the motion blur here. And in our software render, I've added Real Smart Motion Blur here, and we can get away with a lot, although there's no special tricks here. This is just a really simple Mental Ray render, and that's how the motion blur is so much easier. So that's it for our blood render. And now in the next clip, let's go in and let's start setting up the render for our glass.